through suffering, you become purified, you grow and you evolve, and you become better. You will suffer, but let the suffering thrust you into a whole new way of seeing things. And that way, you can see some of the things that you need to die to so as to live. My name is Father Dom Ori. I hope this episode help you to see your suffering in a whole new way. Life has a way of throwing us to the good moments and to the bad moments, isn't it? It's like a pendulum that keeps swinging every time. The thing is, we cannot wait for the good moments alone to appreciate life. No, the deeper joy in living is developing the capacity for the whole swing of life, knowing that even in the moments of suffering, it is pushing us to a deeper capacity of what it means to be human. I remember when I got the phone call from my brother telling me that my sister-in-law has been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And at that moment, the question that bugs anyone when they hear such news is something that has to do with death. For me, it was, is she going to die? And you don't know the answer to that question, do you? And it torments you. You think about it, and it keeps you awake at night. You wake up in the morning, and it is the first thought in your mind. As you go about your day, it keeps tormenting you. In a way, you have already started participating in their suffering. What had happened to me was that I began thinking about all those people who had told me of a loved one who was suffering or has suffered cancer in their lives. I started thinking about them in a whole new, renewed way, like a veil had been lifted up from my eyes to truly see them. It was something I had never felt before in my life. And then a parishioner of mine came to me sobbing and weeping and weeping. And he wanted to talk to me. When I asked him what it was all about, he said that the wife has just been diagnosed with cancer. I felt like everything was spinning out of control. But I sat down with him, not knowing what to say, listening to him. And I felt his pain and suffered as he spoke and asked all the questions that we do ask when we suffer. Why me? Why do they have to suffer and go through that pain? To those questions, I have no answer. But it seems that with my own experience of pain and suffering, I was able to sit in solidarity with him and say, I know what you're feeling because I'm still feeling the shock of the news of my own sister-in-law. A couple of weeks later, as I was driving, my brother called me to tell me that my sister-in-law has just died half an hour ago. I cried and cried, and then I sobbed, and then I asked all the questions. No one could answer me. See, when we suffer, it feels like a rug has been pulled out from under our feet, and it causes some kind of destruction, doesn't it? It does so by making us ask the questions of what to do with the experience that is going on in our life at that moment. We feel like we've been handed some hot potatoes. We don't know if we should hold on to them or throw them away. In suffering, we learn to hold them in tension. The weight of the pain and the weight of the hope that will come from the pain. It is like bearing the weight of light and darkness, knowing that they develop a capacity in us to be human and divine, showing us that we are flesh and spirit who can go through joy and suffering at the same time, just as Jesus did. In the Gospel of John, the Bible says that the Word took flesh and dwelt among us. God took our flesh and blood to breathe our air, to be like us, and to undergo everything humans go through, even going through suffering. St. Paul, writing to the Philippians, said, though he was in the form of God, Jesus did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. This is called kenosis, the self-emptying of God. Jesus, taking the form of us, tells us that it is good to be human, and that includes everything that involves being human: the mess, the junk, the pain, the joy, the light, the glory, everything, including our suffering. And so when Jesus cries on the cross, Father, why have you forsaken me? It is because he felt forsaken. That was real pain. That is why the first Christians insisted that when Jesus died on the cross, it's not just another crucifixion by the Roman Empire. It was God in flesh and blood who took our form, hanging on the cross, covered in blood, and ultimately going through real suffering. A God who is among us, not distant or detached to somewhere else, but a God who is right here, right now, feeling what we are feeling and aching how we are aching. This is why the cross has survived for thousands of years, because it reminds us something that is true of our suffering, something that is true of God's suffering with us, a divine who is suffering with us. He shows us that God knows what it feels like to be rejected, abandoned, dejected, condemned, abused, heartbroken, betrayed, lost, slandered, forgotten, criminalized, dehumanized, everything we have to suffer as humans. God truly understands what it feels like firsthand. God stands in solidarity with everyone's suffering, whether you believe it or not. For God is in the suffering with us. What this does to us and for us is a humble awakening that we are not alone in our suffering. It opens our eyes to see the sufferings of the world. Somehow, you realize you are not going through the worst experience when you compare your suffering to the sufferings of the world. You are not caught up in the idea that it's only you that is going through whatever you are going through. This will help you not to play the victim role, but to begin to see how your suffering could be something that could bring some goodness in the world. Maybe one day, after grieving for the death of a loved one who died tragically in some way, you could see someone going through a similar experience, and you could have the grace of the gift of your suffering to say to them, me too, I understand what you're going through because I have been through it myself. You realize that what used to be so painful has now become something of grace that gives consolation to somebody else. St. Paul, writing his second letter to the Corinthians, said, praise be to God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ. In a way, the comfort we have received from God who participate in our suffering becomes the comfort that we will use to comfort others who are suffering in their lives. You see how this is bigger than you. Yes. Yes. Maybe you are going through something in your life right now. The danger is to think that nobody is going through something worse than you right now. But that is a lie. The wisdom is to embrace whatever pain that comes with it. Let us go all the way down to the depth of it and have the openness of heart to accept that it's all working for our own good. No experience is wasted because God uses everything for our own good if we allow ourselves to see it that way. Everything belongs. With an openness of heart, you can choose not to be bitter or closed down, but to begin to entertain a whole new thing that could come out of your suffering. Trust me, there's always something new to come out of it if you choose to see it that way. A.T. Hillesum, a Dutch author who was deported in 1943 and killed in the concentration camp at Auschwitz in the midst of her suffering, as written in the letters and diaries of A.T. Hillesum, said, "I don't think I have nerves of steel, far from it, but I can certainly stand up to things. I'm not afraid to look suffering straight in the eyes." In the same place, she also said, "Suffering has always been with us. Does it really matter in what form it comes? All that matters is how we bear it and how we fit it into our lives." In these ways, you could hear her openness to embrace suffering, seeing meaning in it, and having the hope that it's all going somewhere good, whether we feel like that at the moment or not. You see, the problem is that we hate the darkness that suffering seems to bring into our lives. But there is also beauty in the darkness, because only when we experience the darkness that we can appreciate the light. Sometimes our sufferings help us to begin to appreciate the beauty of life. You lose something or you lose someone, and all of a sudden, your sense heightens to begin to appreciate what it means to be here. You begin to be grateful for your life. You begin to be compassionate, more loving, more kind, generous, humble. And then your suffering somehow sets you off on a journey of inner conversion and total in-house cleaning. This is what is portrayed in the famous story of the prodigal son. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells this story of a man who had two sons. The younger son asked his father for his share of the inheritance. You know, to ask for such a thing at that time was very offensive, because you only ask for a share of your father's inheritance when your father is dead. So this young man was in a way wishing that the father was dead so he could get his share of the inheritance. In this story, the father grants the younger son this bizarre request, and the boy gets his share of the inheritance and then sets off to a distant land. There, he squandered the money, living a life of debauchery. As time goes on, the land experiences severe famine, and at this time, the young man has spent everything he had, living a partying life. Now, he could barely find something to eat. His friends, all of them, left him because he's no longer the life of the party. Now he was all alone, hungry, desperate, and abandoned. He doesn't have anyone. Now he is suffering, which is another way to put it. But then he had a revelation and thought to himself, it will be good that I return home and ask for my father's forgiveness. And then maybe I could ask him to take me back as one of his hired servants, not as his son again. So he says back home, and on his way, the father saw him and ran towards him, which is something a father of his status at that time wouldn't do. But this man does it to show how much he loves his boy. When the son was about to open his mouth to beg for forgiveness, the father said, quick, bring a ring and put it on his finger. Get a robe to him so that he could wear and change his shoes. He then orders his servants to kill a calf that they had been fattening. And he said that the son is lost, but is now found. Now, when the older brother came back home, he was so unhappy that he confronted his father, saying that all this time he had been with him, the father had not thought to give him a goat, just a goat, to celebrate with his friends. But this son of his, as he put it, came back and he is killing a calf to throw him a party. The father responds, my son, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. You see, in this story, the older son has been with the father, obedient and serving his father, but he was suffering inside. And because he didn't have the openness of heart, his suffering led him to be closed down and become bitter. This is what suffering could do to us if we don't have the openness of heart towards our suffering. He has been in the presence of divine abundance, and yet he couldn't even enjoy it because he was working hard to earn it. The father made him understand with his response that you cannot earn what you already have. The younger son needed to go away to experience some kind of suffering to be able to appreciate the abundance of grace and love that was available to him all this time without him being aware of it. And so he sets off, motivated by his ego on this journey, only to return home as a different person who has let his ego die. You have to have an ego to die to one. Even though he was moved by his ego to do it all by himself, God used that for his good, because God uses everything for our own good. And now, after his suffering and eventual enlightenment, he is ready to come back home. Home is where you belong. Home is where your heart is at home with God. When you join in the divine flow, you are home. The younger son came back home. Now he is ready to start living. Maybe you are in some kind of journey right now in your life, and it's suffering and trouble and many troubles and bitterness. May you come to realize that God will use it for your own good. Whatever way we are suffering, through sickness, loss of someone or something, through mental illness, through addiction, through disappointment, family drama, your job, abuse, or any situation of hopelessness that you find yourself, may you come to acknowledge your powerlessness so that the divine power will become strong in you. God is suffering with you. That is sovereign love. So may your suffering, my dear brothers and sisters, open your heart to the sufferings of the world. And may you come to know that God is fully present in your situation, suffering with you, but also restoring your heart. As Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, nothing beautiful comes without some suffering. And may this be your hope. Thank you for listening. And I hope that these words inspires you and help you through your moments of suffering and give you hope so that you could begin to attain a whole new tomorrow where you could be better and let your suffering be a gift for the world.